Good evening. Tonight, we discuss the Middle East, particularly what's happening in Iran. And to save time, I want to get right into it. I have three incredible guests joining me. I have Judy, Elie, and Zina, Zina, you haven't been on the show before, but you're joining us from Israel, actually. Your flight in wasn't too bad.
My flight was okay, given the
Okay.
circumstances.
I know there was like a 7-hour delay.
Yeah.
But anyways, you're here. We're glad to have you. I want to start really quick with what is currently going on in the Middle East. For those watching, it is very tough to follow, especially when you're on the other side of the world. News is also tough to follow, what's happening day to day. So give us the quick synopsis on what you're seeing.
So where we're at right now is that it seems, according to U.S. officials, that Trump is going to reject the regime's proposal for the end of the war. They have promised to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, which Marco Rubio said the other day that they don't actually mean to open it the way that we would expect international waters to be open. They essentially want to be in charge of dictating who goes in and out of it. So they have said, we will open the Strait of Hormuz, but we want to delay the negotiations of our nuclear program at a later stage. And so letting them keep this enriched uranium, these 400 kilograms of enriched uranium.
Still have this.
They still, well, no one knows what's really going on with it. Trump had at one point said it was nuclear dust. We don't know until there's, until we physically can see what's going on with it. Nobody knows. And so this is not something that the U.S. is willing to accept. So as of now, it seems that, a ceasefire collapse is almost imminent.
But right now there is a ceasefire. Mm-hmm. Nothing's being sent cross-border. I know there's stuff happening
in the northern border.
With Hezbollah.
Yeah.
Elie, I'm curious, just kind of the narrative that you're hearing across Canada, particularly. I know you're quite popular on YouTube as well. What are you seeing? What are you hearing? What are people saying about what's going on over?
Well, I think the people that are not really into it, maybe the way we are, they look at the price of gas, and not a lot of people are happy with this war. I talk to people on all sides of the political spectrum. They don't like the fact that gas prices are going up. They don't like the fact that their summer vacation is going to cost more because flight prices have increased. So I do think when you look at a war, and if you're the U.S. or you're Israel, and this is happening in the U.S. too, you have to be mindful that even if you're doing a military action that may be necessary, and I would agree with probably what you believe, Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. These people are dangerous religious radicals who...
Well, what about their ballistic missiles as well?
So I would agree with that. But the thing is, because the U.S. is a democracy, if the people no longer support the war, the politicians are in trouble. So I would say here in Canada, when I hear about the Iran war, I hear mostly people that are frustrated with how it's impacting them.
And I think it's also important. I mean, I don't want to get into should North America be involved in this war, because that's an entire episode on its own. But one thing that is important to mention is that in January, we saw Iran testing satellite rockets, sending them up into space using ballistic missile technology. And then, of course, they sent the Cayenne-100 missile to the Diego Garcia base, which is about 4,000, 5,000 kilometers, in March. So 2 months later. And Israel actually warned the United States about that in January, didn't really listen. And then, now they have it. Okay, we have to react. Judy, just on your end, you live in Toronto, one of the most diverse places in Canada. What are you hearing? What are you seeing? What are most people saying about this war? And how do they feel about the next upcoming few weeks, even with gas prices?
Yeah, I think the thing about Toronto is that we have a huge Iranian diaspora that live here. And it's so many people that are either quietly or on the streets really rooting for the fall of this regime, because these are people who firsthand know what it's like over there and have moved here, and they need to support the fall of this regime no matter what. So I think that number of people that are represented, I mean, everybody has a friend who knows an Iranian friend who is supporting the downfall of this regime, and I think that's very clear in the demography of, Toronto.
I am seeing a lot of support. And of course, there was a protest of over 300,000 people in Toronto a couple months ago. Zina, just to throw it back to you, what is sort of the biggest gap, you've got about 30 seconds here, that you're seeing between Canada and what's happening in the Middle East, between what people actually understand of what's happening? What's the biggest gap?
Well, people don't really understand how this war impacts them because unlike Europe, which is within the 4,000 kilometer range of Iran's their ballistic missiles, Canada and the U.S. are situated almost 10,000 miles away, 10,000 kilometers away, rather. And so people don't understand how this actually impacts them. And what they don't understand is that, for example, in Venezuela, Iran has purchased hundreds of hectares of land where they're creating Hezbollah positions to build up Hezbollah proxies. And Venezuela is 4,000 kilometers away from Canada. So this can easily be your front door very, very soon if Iran is able to continue to expand its reign of terror.
I appreciate you saying that. We're going to jump to the next segment really quick. I know we're all eager to speak on this, but stay tuned for more. We'll be right back. Okay, so most Canadians can't tell you exactly what our Middle East policy is, but they can tell you what they think it should be. And I know that there's a lot of opinions on that. Zina, Elie, and Judy are joining me to discuss the topic of the Middle East, but particularly now how it relates to Canada. Zina, there was something voted at the UN with Iran's participation in actually making decisions on
women's
rights
rights and terrorism prevention.
So can you just in bland form, real quick, tell us what this is about? Because I did read up on this and I couldn't find anything that said it wasn't true.
I mean, it's true, and that's the bottom line. And it's really, really upsetting because as someone who, I live in Israel now, but I grew up here in Canada, and I was always so proud of Canada's moral stance in the international arena, and to now see that it's, nominating Iran to be on this council of terrorism prevention and women's rights after what happened to so many women, especially during the Masa Amini protest. But then in January, they are still executing, just in 2026 alone, they are executing 600, I believe, over 600 of their own civilians from these protests. And it's really, really upsetting. But moreover, Canada's now, they just issued a visa to an IRGC operative. We have about 1,000 IRGC operatives that are here situated in Canada. One that was actually filmed in Richmond Hill, just casually.
Oh my gosh, I saw him
at
walking
a gym,
around on
a gym.
Yeah.
And next to him is a woman in a sports bra, which and he was head of the Tehran police as part of the repression apparatus.
So
why is he here?
And this kind of just sparked a greater topic for me about Canada being the peacekeepers around the world. I've always been pretty proud that I feel that we are. We stay kind of in the middle, I would say. One thing that I found interesting, so I have a graph that will show up on the screen here, but just really quick to talk about it. So we used to have personnel, like peacekeeping personnel in Mali, South Sudan, Democratic Republic of Congo. We had about 300 peacekeepers, and now it's gone down to 50. And I know that that's kind of a negligible amount, but it seems like we just refuse to get involved, yet we like to talk. One thing that I found kind of interesting was that as we decreased, we've also seen Carney sort of switch his tune on these Iranian strikes being somewhat saying they're inconsistent or we need to find a different approach. Elie, I'm curious, just kind of in your view, should Canada maintain this peacekeeping side? Should they be more involved? Or do you think it's smart and wise for them to just sort of stay out of it? Kind of also referencing this nomination that Zina's talking about.
Well, I just want to say to what you just said, I mean, this is more proof that the United Nations has become a morally corrupt organization. I mean, we see there's other examples that I could cite that are very similar. And when you said that, it didn't surprise me at all. As for peacekeeping, honestly, I'm not an expert when it comes to this, but the thing is if Canada is the only one still doing peacekeeping, and there's 50 peacekeepers, I mean, what does this really do?
Should call this peacekeeping.
I think right now it requires decisive action in going around in a blue tank. I don't know if that's what
Judy, on your view here, just about 30-40 seconds, what do you think Canada's foreign policy should be on something like this, or even where do you feel that it's realistic for them to stand?
You can't have a decisive action when you don't even know what you stand for. And speaking of Mark Carney, speaking out of both sides of his mouth, he has to try to appease both his voter base that support terrorist regimes and at the same time say a statement that sounds nice on Twitter saying, oh, yes, we don't want protesters to be killed. I mean, we don't stand for anything because there is no clear moral clarity in Canada, whether it's from the voting base up to the leadership itself.
So one thing that I thought was an interesting stat was Canada has actually had a record in the last 30 years of the most citizens joining the military. I think it was about over 7,000 people joined this year. So their recruitment is working. For what though? I'm curious. So
well, I have a question for you on that. God forbid something happens to Canada tomorrow. You guys have never, thank God, have never really had to, none of us in Canada when I lived here needed to worry about any sort of existential threat. If tomorrow you had to, how many Canadians are ready to pick up a gun if they need to defend their nation? How many are willing to sign up to go to the army to help, even if it's not in combat, but to physically help defend their nation?
Do we think, though, like, I struggle to believe that, and we're tight on time here, but I struggle to believe that Canada will get involved in something like this unless it's absolutely...
No, but will Canada... Is Canada
able to defend
patriotic
itself.
enough
She's
to
giving you an
defend its
hypothetical
own
of
borders?
if Canada was attacked.
If Canada was attacked, are the people here patriotic enough to defend their own borders if they need to?
It's a question that I think can only be answered if it were to actually happen. But I mean, when you look at just the fact that we've increased our military, I would be very curious to see, okay, well, will they then push any action? Will they send more peacekeepers out? Will they actually try and support? I know that even the peacekeeping missions that they sent in southern Lebanon barely worked in UNRWA. So I think there's also like debate there. Anyways, we have third segment coming up. Stay tuned for more to discuss a little bit more of Canada's involvement in this, and then of course what's going on in the Middle East. Continuing our conversation on what's happening in the Middle East, Zina, I wanted to throw this to you. So why now? I hear a lot of people on social media, and I talk to a lot of people, they say, oh, well, we had more time. And of course, we can't really know. It is impossible to know. We don't have all of the war intelligence, so we just can't pretend like we know. And I'm a big believer in that. But why exactly now did the U.S. and Israel decide to get involved?
Well, I guess that's the million-dollar question, because there are so many conflicting reports saying different things. I would assume that, especially after the big protests that we saw that began in late December, and then the horror that the limited horror that we watched during the January peak protests was an indication that the regime was weak, that there was a lot of instability, and that this was the time.
Do you think I am actually curious, do you think the missile testing actually had a big part of this? Or is this kind of a side thing?
No.
Because it's not talked about a lot.
For sure. There was a lot of indications. And at one point, Netanyahu said that if a strike wasn't carried out, that there would have been that Iran would have been able to rush to a nuclear bomb. And something important is that Steve Witkoff, the special envoy to the Middle East, had said on a news segment that when they were in the negotiating table, Iran was very clear that they had enough enriched uranium to build 11 nuclear bombs. He said that in the negotiating table.
Yeah, I think also the fact that the global political landscape, I think Trump just saw an opportunity and couldn't give it up. The fact that Russia was weak and they were already distracted with the Ukraine war, and the fact that they had just taken Venezuela down and had to win from that, he just felt like, if I don't do it now, then I can't do it ever.
Then when are we going to do it?
Yeah.
Okay, let me ask this. Just for people watching, who are the players in this? So, of course, we have Iran, we have Israel, we have the United States, but there are more. We talk about the Gulf states. Who else do we talk about? I hear the Kurds. I hear a lot of different people.
The UAE. The
Right.
UAE was targeted so badly throughout this entire...
I saw a Fairmont hotel was hit by a drone.
It was mostly civilian infrastructure. Saudi Arabia, which, there's this... it's really comical that people think that they spread this notion that Israel dragged the U.S. into the war, when it was actually Saudi Arabia that was begging Trump to finish the job. Yes, they were 100% like pushing him to continue the job. And so we're seeing, I think that the Middle East...
I thought Saudi and Iran were allies.
Well, no, not allies. They kind of play both.
Acquaintances.
They're trying not to anger
So you talk
Iran.
about the UAE. Who else? Just really quick.
Bahrain.
Okay.
The Oman.
What are they doing with the Turks, though? They were throwing them in, I think, to try and help one side of the border. Is that?
Well, that was a very, in my opinion, foolish move, because I think the biggest, the Iranians themselves believe in their territorial integrity.
So they would fight harder for it.
Right. And so I think it would be a mistake to arm a specific minority group or a foreign entity coming in to deal with this regime.
Elie, at what point, we talked about fuel prices. And I know that this is so small, but I actually didn't realize until I experienced this oil shock. We're all quite young here, but I've never experienced an oil shock like this one. How much oil actually affects the economy and buying decisions just in general, in everything, even in my business. When you look at Canada's perspective, how far do they go? How much do they get involved? I mean, we see fuel prices going up. What if they went to like $3?
Yeah.
What's Carney coming out and saying? Or what is Canada's position?
Well, Canada's in a bad position because we've had 10 years of a government that was ideologically anti-oil and gas. We lost $670 billion worth of natural resources projects. We had Justin Trudeau, who literally said we need to phase out the oil sands, which are the fourth largest oil reserve in the world. We have $13 trillion worth of oil, and he said we need to phase it out. We should be an energy independent nation. So as to what they do now, I mean, there's a few small things they can do. Remove the tax on gas, for example.
Okay, so
but
you're
at the
saying
end of
just
the day,
domestically they're only going to do they're not going to get involved in any capacity outside of domestic.
Our military has been completely depleted. I mean, I have friends in the military. They tell me like all this stuff is antiquated. Like what we don't have the capacity to really get involved in a meaningful way. I think
we've got to move on to the last segment here. But I appreciate this discussion. Stay tuned for more. We continue to discuss the final topics of the Middle Eastern discussion. Closing out our Middle Eastern discussion and really where Canada's involvement gets into this. Judy, how frustrated do you think Canadians would be if we got involved in any other capacity other than things we can do domestically to drop the price as oil continues to rise, if it does?
I actually don't think Canadians would be frustrated. Again, I mentioned we have a lot of Iranian diaspora that live in Canada that would fully support that and would be overjoyed to hear that Canada is
What
getting
does getting
more
involved look like? Is it sending aid? Is it helping Iranian citizens? Is it supporting with strikes? I would be shocked if they did that.
Yeah, I don't think Canada has the even military capacity to do anything militarily, but I would kind of go with Zina here and say that the Iranian people in that country really need support to actually topple the regime, which is ultimately the only thing that would bring significant change. So
but
whether
the UN
it's
won't
boots
get
on the
involved
ground,
in that.
the UN is
won't
irrelevant.
support
Who
with
cares about the UN? It's not about the UN. And frankly, so is Canada, I'll be honest, in this conflict. And kind of like what Elie said, in terms of what it's impacting us domestically with oil prices and prices of goods, we are 15 years too late to do anything about it now. Yes, Carney should probably remove the carbon tax, which is still in effect, by the way.
It is.
But other than that, what can you really do?
So, Zina, we were talking about the ceasefire, and I wanted to get your hot take on this. Ceasefire collapses, ceasefire doesn't. What happens if it does?
What happens if it does is that there needs to be a real strategy at ensuring that the ballistic missile program is completely destroyed as much as possible. Unfortunately, it'll never be zero, but to the best of our abilities, you could get it to a good point, that there needs to be some either negotiated or special ground operation to extract that enriched uranium. And there needs to be
ground operation.
I would say that's the only way. How else are you going to do it? And just to also add to what Judy mentioned is, I think what Canadians really need to understand is the regime is acting like it's a global superpower right now. Imagine if it did have nuclear capabilities.
Yeah, they immediately
right now.
gain what North Korea gained. They immediately gain immunity, and now they can actually start negotiating.
Right. So the gas pump prices right now are really terrible. It has an impact on everyday Canadians. What happens when the regime has nuclear capabilities?
No, then there's actual fear on what. Yeah.
I do want to say also, like how Iran attacked Dubai, for example, that was a representation of Iran's threat against the West. Dubai is always seen as like sort of a Western piece of the Middle East, but that should make it clear to you that if Iran had the capability to attack us on the ground, they would.
I just want to add something just to what you said earlier, your first question. You're totally right about Dubai. If they're willing to do this to their Muslim neighbors, I don't even want to think about what they would do to the West. But I don't think Canadians would support intervention because of the Trump derangement syndrome. I think while you make very good case for it, I support the Persian community. I want to see this horrible regime overthrown. We see the narratives in the U.S. from the U.S. Democrat mainstream media of this is Trump's war. If Canada got involved in any way, Carney would be seen as he's joining Trump's war, and everyone would put their hands up in the air and be like, this is Trump's war. Unfortunately, Trump derangement syndrome is a big part of Canadian politics now, and it would play a role here.
Because even if you don't necessarily, a lot of Israelis right now, we're not happy with the current ceasefire. We don't think that military objectives.
Well, you're also very critical of the Israeli government. I mean, I think that's one thing to make very clear.
Yeah, of course.
You don't just support every single decision that's being made.
For sure. But at the end of the day, what's really upsetting is that you can, not necessarily agree with every aspect of the military conduct throughout this war and agree that it's objectively a good thing for this
Yeah.
regime to be weaker. Those are two separate things. You don't have to like that Trump's doing it. You don't have to like that regime change in the past hasn't necessarily worked, and you don't necessarily.
Zina, we only have about a minute here. No, map out for me
Yeah,
regime
yeah.
change. You kind of mapped out, and I know that this is your perspective, your view, it's your subjective viewpoint, but we've got about 45 seconds. What is regime change looking like if this ceasefire somehow maintains, or I don't even know what happens, but what do you paint as the picture?
I would say that we would have to arm the Iranians. We would have to arm the Iranians. They need to be provided intelligence. They need to get internet access back so that they can actually coordinate with one another to topple the regime. Israel and the United States should be continuing to attack the repression apparatus, the Besiege, the IRGC, not just striking them with drones, but also one thing that the Mossad was doing was actually calling mid-level regime, the IRGC and Besiege officers saying, you do not get to attack these protesters or we will come find you. And so as long as you are as long as you're bankrupting the regime as much as possible, making it impossible for them to pay some of these officers, and then you are actually helping the Iranians themselves coordinate some sort of effort to topple the regime, then that's, I think, what, the best case scenario would be at the end of this.
All right. Well, thank you so much for watching.